How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiega here, and it's December the 10th, officially through Week 14 now, getting to the nitty-gritty part of the season where everything is pretty much, up for grabs, and there's a lot of high stakes everywhere. So a lot of exciting things are coming up, but not without talking and reflecting on what we saw over this past weekend. And we're going to start off with last night with the Cincinnati and Dallas game. Not the most, high stakes, even though I just said that, but still very exciting, very surprising, shocking, and we still had a lot of good performances just individually as well. So we're going to go into that. Also, later on in the show, talking about Week 14, there was a lot of big games that meant a lot, like the Vikings and Falcons game. A lot of consequences coming from that one. The Seahawks and Cardinals game as well, a division matchup there. And the Steelers and Browns game are all things that we're going to get to at some point in today's show. So make sure to stick around. But don't only stick around. If you want to get involved with the show and, let me know any questions, comments, or opinions you want to share during the show on any of the topics that we have coming up, please don't hesitate to do so, because your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and insight. So if you want to get involved and, say something on any of our topics, there's an easy way to do that now, just by using the new Super Chat feature. You can use a new Super Chat feature by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that I see your message, I can put it out there, I can read it back out on the show, and just take the conversation elsewhere. Just you guys adding to the conversation always makes the show a lot better. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, use the new Super Chat feature, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and get involved with the show. But we can go back now and start talking about what we saw last night in a Bengals and Cowboys game that, going into the game, you're looking at a 4-17 and a 5-17, and you're thinking, what can we expect out of this? What is there to look forward to, right? Because, the Bengals are almost out of it. The Cowboys are, again, pretty much out of it as well. So, initially this was looked at as one of the premier matchups, but I mentioned it yesterday how similar these two teams are. And, the records also were a reflection of that. But ultimately, in the end, I'm glad I tuned into this game, and I actually was watching most of the game for, the majority of the night to see the Cincinnati Bengals pull out a late victory last night over Dallas to snap their 3-game losing streak and also bring them to a 5-8 record, while Dallas, on the other hand, also becomes 5-8, but they obviously lose, but with a much more sour feeling, because if there was any hope of them ever making the playoffs at some point this season, I thought it definitely, ended last night with that loss. They pretty much needed to be perfect, and they were also going to have a lot of help on top of that. So not keeping up their end of things is definitely going to put a dent in their playoff hopes, definitely going forward. But for all the high-scoring, close games that Cincinnati has been involved in this year, this is only their second one-score victory this year. They've had 7 of their 8 losses this year be by 7 or less points this year, and they've obviously lost all of them. So to get one finally to go in their favor, I thought was a great reflection of not only this season, to kind of epitomize everything, but Joe Burrow mentioned it at the end of the game in the ESPN interview that they've really not had a lot of breaks this year. They've not had a lot of things go their way, whether it be injuries with Orlando Brown and Logan Wilson, obviously, or just things just like the ball not rolling their way, really, at the end of the day. So, I thought how he said that and the fact that I just read that out, I think really, shows what kind of season it's been for the Bengals. Frustrating, obviously, but I thought they definitely needed a win like they got last night. And also for Cincinnati, right, they were able to earn a victory with their quarterback, I just mentioned Joe Burrow, playing still at a very high level. Last night's game was the 4th consecutive game for Joe Burrow to throw, where he has thrown 300-plus yards and 3 touchdowns as well, joining only Steve Young, Patrick Mahomes, Peyton Manning as the only quarterbacks to do so, have 4 consecutive games with 300 plus passing yards and 3 touchdowns as well. But what kind of also, reflects on this season has been that those guys, when they were able to do that, they had records like 3-13, 12-4, and things like that. Whereas Joe Burrow this season obviously has a 5-8 record. So it's been the story of the entire season, right? How Joe has been and should be in the MVP conversations, but obviously they're probably not going to give it to him with that kind of record. So it's just another thing to add on to that, to kind of just show the missed opportunity that the Bengals have had this season. And for the Cowboys, on the other hand, the loss, I mean, it didn't mean much, in my opinion. Looking at this Cowboys team, I already, thought they weren't going to make the playoffs. But Dallas also lost arguably one of their best players, their most impressive player, I think, this year for me. Their linebacker, DeMarvion Overshown, to a knee injury. And Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones said after the game that it looks pretty serious. I haven't seen any official word on the official diagnosis of it, but Overshown, he's in his second season currently, but he missed his rookie year with a torn ligament in his left knee, and now he injured his right knee last night. So you're hoping it's not anything too serious, but we're just going to have to wait and see, because DeMarvion Overshown, going into this season, I didn't really know too much about him, but it's hard to ignore him now because he does so much for them. He's everywhere, making tackles all over the field. And apart from Micah Parsons, I would say he's the most exciting player on, at least definitely on the defense, if not on the entire team. CeeDee Lamb can make an argument as well, but it's you could say it's all 3 of those guys: Overshown, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons. So they got at least those 3 guys definitely guaranteed going forward for the foreseeable future. But in this game, CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase were 2 of the biggest stars, and they were the ones that got on the board first in this game, with CeeDee Lamb scoring a touchdown to start things off, and then Jamar Chase followed him up as well. And I'm mentioning both of those wide receivers, and I got to mention how Jamar Chase finished the game with 14 receptions, 177 yards, and 2 touchdowns, where on the other side, CeeDee Lamb had 6 receptions for 93 yards, albeit playing with a backup, so still impressive numbers, but that there is a little asterisk, and a touchdown as well for CeeDee Lamb. Both of those guys definitely doing their part, and it's just a continuation of Jamar Chase and the kind of season he's also been having, right? Joe's having a great year, but Jamar also, could be in line for a triple crown, so that's great for the Bengals, maybe not financially, but for the performances on the field, definitely does not shoulder any of the blame for much of the shortcomings this year for Cincinnati. But after those 2 guys got on the board, Dallas hit a field goal later on before Chase Brown eventually scored the second touchdown to give the Bengals a 14-10 lead. But Cincinnati would tack onto that as well right before halftime, and the Bengals took a 7-point lead into halftime. But it looked like at that point the Bengals were really in control, but in the second option off of Joe Burrow on the following drive, then a field goal finally gave them the lead. Now they're up by 3 points. The score was 17-20 at this point. But Cincinnati would ultimately respond with a field goal, and then we get a punt of the game, where Cincinnati was obviously punting after the Cowboys defense was doing very well. Overall, for the entire game, they were playing pretty well to kind of stop Cincinnati and their offense, and they forced them to punt with about 2 minutes left in the game. And to add on to Dallas's great performance, they actually blocked the punt. It didn't go backwards or anything, but it stopped the trajectory and the force of the punt. So it only really went maybe 10, 15 yards, if that. And, at that point, I've never played football, really, but watching it at that point, that if it touches anybody on the receiving team, it's a live football, obviously, right? So usually players, they think it's a grenade or something, so they just get away. They want nothing to do with it. They run away from it as far as possible because they don't want to mess it up. But in this particular instance, right, you can't make it up with the Dallas Cowboys and the kind of season that they're having. A player on their team, I think his name was Amarion Oruwariye. I know I got the last name right. It might not be his first name, but the last name is definitely right. He tried to field it for whatever reason, and it kind of just like went through his arm, and he obviously touched it. The Bengals fall on it, and they recover the ball at the most crucial point of the game, and obviously they go down and score through Jamar Chase. And I mean, it's those kind of things that happen in a season like this, right? The season can't end quick enough for the Dallas Cowboys in those kind of decisions and those kind of results as well. It's just been a pretty unbelievable season, but not in any sort of positive term. So, I mean, it just culminated last night. Micah Parsons was beside himself as well. If you guys remember his reaction, that's, I'm sure, how every Cowboys fan was reacting to not only the game, but just the entire season. For them to play pretty well on defense, for them to still lose a game like that where they put in a great effort with a backup quarterback, it definitely hurts. But, I mean, at this point, if they're not mathematically eliminated already, that definitely did it, at least from a morale standpoint. So, I mean, there's not much to say on the Cowboys, but on the Bengals, the last thing I will say for the Bengals is, in particular for Joe and Jamar Chase, I know it's hard to kind of give them any awards for, you know, the team record that they're obviously on, but I think they should get at least some consideration for Offensive Player of the Year or like MVP. I know Saquon and Derek and, you know, Josh Allen are kind of dominating those two categories. But, you know, Jamar Chase, I mean, Cooper Kupp got the Triple Crown and he won the Offensive Player of the Year. So, I mean, I'm not saying make one exception, like, you know, like you don't have to keep it fair, but, I mean, Jamar Chase is doing phenomenal things, and I think it would be a bit unfair pretty much to just say, you know, the record's bad, we're not even going to acknowledge him. Maybe make him a finalist or something like that. I think that would be the most fair thing to happen. But, I mean, they definitely should get some consideration for those awards, in my opinion. So we're going to move on from that game and start looking over, before we get to Week 14, there's been a lot of, you know, we talked about some of the drama with the Eagles yesterday about the game. Even though they won, there was still some backlash, some animosity in that locker room perhaps, and Brandon Graham only added to it with some of his comments. So I had to revisit it. We're going to talk about what A.J. Brown said again, Jalen Hurts, and Brandon Graham, and how he added to it, and just the overall thoughts on what we can make out of this going forward. So we'll be right back. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go back to a segment that we talked about yesterday. Not so much on the result of the Eagles and Carolina game. Obviously, the Eagles won, but it was very close in the end. But they still won the game, and not all wins are created equal, right? Because obviously, a win is great if you're beating a team by like 21 points, and you obviously played great. But then you got the wins like yesterday where there was a real possibility that the Panthers could have won that game if not for an Xavier Legette drop that really cost them the game, or was part of it. The one play didn't cost them the game, but regardless of that, the Eagles won in a very close game, despite the fact, obviously, you know, the differences in the team and the trajectories and everything like that. But, you know, that wasn't what was all taken away from yesterday, because yesterday we talked about how the Eagles won, but also what transpired afterwards when A.J. Brown talked to the media, and there was a pretty awkward moment with A.J. and the way he responded to some of the questions. Also, what Jalen Hurts said, looking and kind of assuming he felt pretty annoyed as well after the game based on the passing offense that we saw on display yesterday. And I'll find the stats here quickly, but on what A.J. Brown said yesterday, the media asked A.J. what he thought the offense needed to improve on after a game like that. And A.J. Brown had a pretty quick remark, but to kind of give you guys some context if you didn't know, yesterday in terms of passing offense, Jalen Hurts only threw for 108 yards, 2 touchdowns, and A.J. Brown was the leading receiver with only 4 receptions and 43 receiving yards. Devontae Smith only had 37 yards and also 4 receptions. So not great numbers, obviously, for 2 guys of that caliber. So they asked A.J. Brown what he thought the offense needed to improve on after the game. And all A.J. Brown said was passing. They needed to improve on passing. That's all A.J. Brown said, with kind of a sarcastic, kind of tone to it. So obviously, when you hear that, you think right away it's a shot at Jalen. He's not happy with Jalen. There could be some friction there. That's the first thing people think of, obviously, when you say something like that, because who is controlling the passing game? It's obviously the quarterback. He has the ball every single time that the ball is snapped. So if you're saying that the passing game needs improvement, then the quarterback needs improvement, obviously, right? Because he dictates everything. And to that note, Jalen Hurts was also a little bit annoyed after the game when he was also asked some questions by the media, obviously, and he was asked if he felt there needed to be some conversations or just some talks about being on the same page, and whether he thought having those conversations this late in the season, was appropriate, or, that there should be those conversations this late in the season, to which all he said was no. He said no, and then he refused to say anything afterwards, with a bit of a sarcastic laugh as well. So already you're kind of feeling a little bit of tension there, just because it's not how you would react when you win a game. Of course, you should have beaten this team by at least 2 or maybe even 3 scores, obviously, with an 11-2 record now, and the Panthers at 3-10. But there is that bit of, there could be some friction here. Then we get to the main part of this with Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham yesterday, he has a weekly radio show, sports radio, on 94 WIP in Philadelphia, I'm assuming. He usually has it on Monday night, and he was asked about the exchange pretty directly, and he did not mince words. He didn't hold back anything, and he just said what he thought. And, it's fair, but in hindsight, it's probably not the best way to go about this situation. But what Brandon Graham said was, the person that's complaining needs to be accountable. I don't know the whole story, but I know that 1 is trying, and 11 could be a little better with how he responds to things. 1 referencing Jalen Hurts, and 11 referencing A.J. Brown. He continued by saying, they were friends before this, but things have changed, and I understand that because life happens. But it's the business side that we have to make sure the personal doesn't get in the way of business. So, pretty direct. I highlighted 2 things on my sheet that really just stuck out from his statement, and I'll get to it. But before I react to it, Brandon Graham did walk back on his comments, just today, I'm assuming. And I don't have the full quote just for time purposes, but I do have some of the quotes where he said he made a mistake. He assumed that it was something that it wasn't. He said that he had it all wrong. And he said also that I want brothers to be able to just hash things out. Paraphrasing what he said in his, apology, or just retracting this statement that he said on Monday night. But the initial reactions to what Brandon Graham said, first, is it's just a pretty crazy, unexpected thing to say. he started the whole thing off by saying, I don't know the whole story. So the fact that he like gave acknowledgement that he doesn't really have all the information should have kind of, I don't know, maybe like stopped him a little bit, or maybe had him reconsider what he was going to say. I don't really know, because he says, I don't really know the whole story, but he goes on to say that they were friends before this. But then he talks about Jalen Hurts and the fact that he's trying, to go out there and play well, and how A.J. Brown could do a better job at how he responds to things. So the fact that he said he doesn't know the whole story, but then making a claim like they were friends, I mean, he's in the locker room, I'm assuming, a lot, so he would know that kind of information, but he started it off by kind of prefacing that he doesn't know exactly what happened. So to make a claim like that is pretty, a pretty outlandish thing to say, for a lack of a better terms. Even if, you have that seniority and that familiarity in the locker room, still, I couldn't believe what he said, to just kind of air it all out like that. And as much as he like apologized and things like that, which I thought was all right to do, and it was the right thing to do, obviously, but it's out there now. Like, it's out there. Everyone saw it. Everyone's reacting to it. Everybody makes their own interpretations of what you said, regardless if you feel bad about it or you try to retract your statement. It's already out there, so you can't make people kind of forget or unhear what you said. So in that same breath, I think what A.J. Brown said, being pretty cryptic and saying that the passing game needs to improve, you could also say that he didn't mean to make much of it, that, I'm sure if they ask him about it, which they probably will, he'll say that, he meant that it should be the entire offense, not just Jalen, obviously. But in that same breath, again, like Brandon Graham sort of should have kind of walked back on his statement while he was saying it, maybe reconsidered and not use such direct words or, statement in the way that he said it. But much like that, A.J. Brown, I feel like, knowing what, the media is, obviously, and how people interpret things very differently, don't just give them the resources, the context to, to go at you and make their own speculations, right? By saying just that the passing game needs work, it's a pretty cryptic message, where I think Devontae Smith also talked about it, and they asked him about his frustrations, and he said that everybody just needs to get on the same page, we all just need to know the signals, and we just all need to get better, something along those lines. So obviously Devontae Smith gets it. You don't have to be so direct with the media, obviously, and I think AJ, the fact that he just said passing because obviously he was frustrated, I don't think made the situation any better, and I think he was wrong for saying, just passing, knowing what the results would have been on the other side. But I'm not even, like, AJ could be mad and he could be frustrated. I don't even mind that. Just don't be so direct in giving the media this sort of, resource to go back at you and create a distraction, essentially, right? I don't even care that he shows it on the sidelines. He could slam his helmet. He could go over there and talk to Jalen Hurts pretty aggressively. But all of that is fine, because it's not like the media know exactly what you're saying. If they ask you about it, afterwards, you could just say, oh, we were talking about whatever, right? You can make anything up, and, for them to come to a conclusion after that, it would make it seem a lot less legitimate, because they don't truly know what you said or what was going on. They could pretty much assume, but when you say that, the passing game needs to improve, that's what this offense needs, the passing game. So that was also the way that he kind of handled it, being pretty cryptic, I don't think was right. Much like I don't think Brandon Graham to kind of make a statement like this was pretty right also. All of these things could just, be handled behind closed doors, because you're an 11-2 team, right? If you're an 11-2 team, you don't need things like this to just pop up, right? You got the best offensive line, one of the best, if not the best offense, the best offensive player in Saquon Barkley, arguably the best wide receiver duo, one of the best defensive lines, a great secondary. You don't need to make problems for yourself, right? And if you don't think the media and all the questions are going to be about this exchange during a week where you got to prepare for the Steelers, you don't really know how this thing goes, right? All the questions and everything is going to be surrounding this, just creating another distraction for an 11-2 team that on those frustrations, you can understand it, going back to it, just because you're trying to compete with the best of the best, with the Lions, with the Vikings, and things like that. So clearly, showing those frustrations is a competitive nature that you want, obviously, because you're striving for perfection. But again, at 11-2, all those things can be handled behind closed doors. At practice, at meetings, you could say whatever you want to each other there. But to air it out like this, I always think really turns out worse than it makes it a positive, outcome at the end of the day. So you mean they don't need these distractions, right? And it makes me think also, like, they're not that they're fortunate that they're 11-2 because they're all great players. They're one of the most talented teams in the NFL. So a record like this is warranted. But could you imagine if this team was like 5-8 or like 7-6 and they were struggling? There was a lot of low points in the season. What kind of things would be coming out of that locker room when at 11-2, one game where the passing game maybe isn't, the greatest, and it's kind of been building up. There's been some spurts of it here or there, and now you get this sort of reaction. Could you imagine if they've been struggling the entire season, what this locker room would have been like, what the exchanges would have been like? Maybe Nick Sirianni would have been fired at some point, because at 11-2, not that everything should be perfect and everything like that, but it feels like this was a bit overblown, and they could have handled it better. So I think just going forward, they're in a great spot still. They're only a game behind of the Lions for the number 1 seed. So things like this, coming up in this game against the Steelers, one of two things are going to happen, right? When something like this happens for a good team like this, one, the next game against Pittsburgh, there's going to be no issue. The passing game is going to look great. A.J. Brown's going to get like 8 receptions, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns or something like that. And they're going to be smiling, laughing about it on the sideline like nothing happened. That's the ideal scenario for Philadelphia. But what could also happen could be that the Steelers play them close. A.J. Brown's still not getting the ball. The running game struggling. And A.J. and Jalen, have some tense moments during the game. And, if they lose the game also, it'll make it even worse. But, it's something like that's going to happen, right? This is just going to be blown over. The Eagles are going to dominate, and A.J. Brown's going to have a great game. Or if the Steelers play it right, they could frustrate A.J. Brown. The passing game could be off, and they'll get in their own way rather than, focusing on all the little things that they need to do against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are also in their own right 10-3 heading into this game. So this whole situation, which just kind of quickly picked up into this whole big issue that could have simply been avoided if, these comments wouldn't have been so direct. But we'll see how it goes. I don't think they're going to collapse or anything like that, but it's very odd to see an 11-2 team, have this interaction like they're 7-6 or something. So we'll see how it all plays out on Sunday. But I mentioned the Steelers there briefly, and we're going to go back to Sunday and talk about their game against the Cleveland Browns. They had a pretty dominant showing all in all, but we're going to try and answer the questions of their number 2 wide receiver. Is that a problem going forward based on what we saw and what we know going forward? And also looking ahead to 3 of their hardest games of the schedule coming up, starting with the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll be right back with that topic right after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast and continue looking over Week 14 because there were some pretty big games and some pretty big victories as well coming from Sunday, starting off with the Steelers getting a home victory over the Cleveland Browns. Despite the Steelers stressing that it wasn't a revenge game, they got their get back against Cleveland in a 27-14 victory over the Browns, which brings the Steelers to 10-3 on the season, which is important, obviously, based on the other results in Week 14, because now the Steelers are 10-13, and with the loss by the Buffalo Bills, they're also 10-13, opening the door for the Steelers to potentially squeeze in there for the number 2 seed. Unlikely in all reality, but it is what it is. They have the same record, so in reality the Steelers could get there, but the path to get there is a lot harder than any other AFC playoff team in the playoffs currently right now. So that's what they're kind of facing as of right now. While Cleveland was not playing for much in this game, but they were in this game because Pittsburgh was playing without George Pickens. He was inactive before the game. The report said that he was going to try it out, but quickly, it became a situation where they didn't feel comfortable with it, so they decided to make him inactive. And on that note, real quick, Mike Tomlin had his press conference today and said that, George Pickens had an MRI. The MRI came back with, news that the injury was a little bit more severe than they originally thought. So, there's no diagnosis or anything like that, but Mike Tomlin said that George Pickens at this point is doubtful for the game against Philadelphia. If he had to give an answer, he probably would have said that George was not going to play, but they are going to let it obviously play out throughout the week. But that's obviously huge news because of what George means to this offense, but it wasn't enough for the Browns to win because, they got in their own way a lot of the times, mainly with their kicker missing 2 field goals in this game. Even if he still made them, based on the same score, they still would have lost. But, those field goals came at very important times in the game where, missing them was going to be so deflating. And we saw it play out in this game. But throughout this game, Winston also threw 2 more interceptions. One that allowed the Steelers offense to get going with Keanu Benton intercepting it, putting the Steelers in enemy territory when they obviously scored their first touchdown. Then the second one ended the game pretty much. So the 2 turnovers that they had also came at very crucial points in the game, and really it was all about the turnover battle. Really that and the penalties also, 9-6 in favor of the Steelers, and the third down conversions were huge because the Browns, for how well they played at home in the snow and in front of their home crowd, obviously, in Pittsburgh on Sunday, there were only 2 for 13 on third down conversions to the Steelers, 6 of 14. So not great on either side, but the Browns to only convert 2 out of 13 third downs that you had is obviously a massive, swing in how your offense, flows throughout the game. But overall, in this game, how the game broke down and where, we saw kind of the Steelers pull away was initially when this game started, the Steelers were up 3-0, but Cleveland, came out fast and they scored a touchdown through Jerry Jeudy extending the play or Winston extending the play, finding Jerry Jeudy for 7 points. So the Browns were up 3-7 early in this game, but like I mentioned, when Jameis Winston threw that first interception, that's when the game started to turn a little bit for Pittsburgh, because up until that point, the Steelers' offense was still trying to find their way without their leading receiver. I heard something like on Sunday that some of the receivers like Scotty Miller, like Pat Freiermuth even, knew or actually didn't know that George wasn't going to play until quite soon to kickoff, quite close to the game starting. So with that in mind, they went out there and they showed that they weren't really expecting to be without George Pickens. So they were really struggling, but the game started to turn, like I said, when Pittsburgh intercepted Jameis Winston. It was their defensive tackle, Keanu Benton, of all people, and Najee Harris scored a touchdown, so now they were leading 10-7, and it got to 13-7 after Chris Boswell hit another field goal, but the Browns were driving into Pittsburgh territory to end the first half, and they eventually got stopped on third down, but Cleveland had an opportunity to cut the lead to only 3, but then we got our first missed field goal. The first missed field goal came right before halftime, which, I mean, it's not like a touchdown right before the half, right, obviously, but it is at least something, right? You get at least a little bit of points, and then when you look up at that scoreboard, you're not down by 6 points, you're only down by 3. So the fact that they missed that one stung, but it didn't hurt as much as their second one, because their second one came right after halftime ended, because the Browns got the ball first, and they were, again, in position to kick another field goal, and this time cut it down to 3 points. But again, their kicker missed, and now you kind of start getting in your own head, right? You miss another field goal, you're like, damn, like, this game could have been tied right now at 13-13, but instead you missed both of them, and now you're still down 6. And of course, how things go when you usually miss those gimme points. The Steelers scored a touchdown right after that to push it to 20-7, and then another turnover on downs led to the Steelers' next touchdown. So in just the blink of an eye, the Steelers go up by 20 points at this point in the game, and now, at least for me, it looks like the Browns are pretty much out of it, but it got a little bit interesting in the fourth quarter because the Steelers scored so quickly that, it felt like it was over, being up 20 points, but there was still so much time left that the Browns scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter, but they scored a touchdown after Pittsburgh fumbled. But then, once they actually got the ball back, Jameis threw that second interception, in which really ended the game at 27-14. So, I mean, overall, from this game and, knowing that there was no George Pickens, it was a concern prior to the game. I thought he was going to play. When he popped up on that injury report on Friday, I believe, I figured that it wasn't anything too serious. I thought he was going to test it out and that he was going to play anyway, but I was pretty surprised that he didn't play. But even during the game, even though they won, it was probably, the fact that they were playing Cleveland, that this wasn't a major issue. I mean, they did struggle, don't get me wrong, but, they eventually figured it out, and I think that, in my opinion, has more to do with the Browns being pretty bad than the Steelers, having, other guys step up in huge moments. But also, in that same breath, Mike Williams made a nice catch, Pat Freiermuth scored again, Van Jefferson scored, so again, those are all great. Those guys played a part in it, but I feel like this is going to be a bigger problem against the best teams, coming up, So, it leads into those next games that we're going to talk about, right? Because the Steelers right now are sitting pretty at 10-3. It's great. It's fantastic. You're getting excited a little bit, right, if you're a Steelers fan. But their last 4 games, are going to be at Philadelphia, at Baltimore, at home against the Chiefs, and at home against the Bengals to end the year, the regular season. They've had some nice games. They've had some nice wins, especially over the Baltimore Ravens. The Commanders game was great for them. And I'll even throw this game in there. This was a pretty good win for them as well. But they've, for the most part, beaten all the teams that they should have, right? They should have been the Cowboys. They're going to want that one back. The Colts game, they were pretty dominated in that game, so, that one would go either way. And the Browns game, in Cleveland, that could have gone their way. They were winning at one point, but they threw it away as well. But for the most part, they've been the team that they should have been, hence the 10-3 record. But during the second part of the schedule, where a lot of people didn't favor them, even still, they've gotten some pretty nice results, right? Up until this point, they're doing great. They're in first place in the AFC North, where a lot of people felt that they were going to fall off from the Commanders game going forward. So even still, I think the next 4 games is a whole different level, right? Everyone's talking about the Steelers. Are they contenders or not? Are they going to be a real threat in the playoffs? Is Russell Wilson really that guy for them? We've seen it to a decent level now, beating the Bengals in a shootout, beating the Browns now, beating the Commanders. But I think to really be in that level, we're going to see it over the next 4 games, right? 3 of the next 4 teams are what I consider, the elite teams in the NFL. These are the real Super Bowl contenders in Philadelphia, Kansas City, and I'll throw Baltimore in there as well, even though the Steelers beat them already. This is the litmus test, right? This is the the way you know if you can compete for a conference championship in anybody's wildest dreams for a Super Bowl, right? If in any world also you can get to the number 2 seed, to get to the number 2 seed, you're going to have to probably beat 2, if not 3 of these teams coming up. And that's going to be almost, I don't like saying impossible, but, without George, you don't know how long he's going to be out. If you get the number 2 seed and let's say you beat the Eagles and the Chiefs or something like that, and you go 2-2 over these next 4, that would be pretty decent. And I think you can consider the Steelers in a list of Super Bowl contenders. They would be the last one, right at the cutoff, right? If they win 2 of the next 4. But the next 3 games are super hard, at Philly, at Baltimore, and against the Chiefs. But it's what this team, wants, right? If you want to be considered among those teams, you got to go out and beat them. And I think this would tell a lot of people whether or not the Steelers are serious. Of course, how they win and how they lose potentially is important. But, the win over the Browns was great, but the next 3 are really going to tell us all we need to know about this Steelers team. Albeit a little bit unfair if George Pickens doesn't play, but it is what it is, right? These next 3 games are going to be exciting, but also very difficult for the Steelers. But we're going to leave that topic there for a little bit, and we're going to move on to 2 more that we have on today's show. Looking at the Vikings and Falcons game, it was Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota, but it did not go in his favor at all. And the Minnesota Vikings dominated the Falcons, sending them to a 4-game losing streak while they keep pace with the Detroit Lions. We're going to go into that game and talk about what we learned about it and whether or not the Falcons should consider a quarterback change. That is coming up right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, we are back here on the show now to look at a game that we had previewed last Wednesday in the Vikings and Falcons game. So, I predicted the Vikings to win. I thought they just had a better team. It was going to be too much for the Falcons defense, and I was right, but even still, I didn't think it was going to be like this, man. Like Sam Darnold to get 5 touchdowns and Kirk to continue his struggles, We hyped this up to be Kirk Cousins' revenge game, but his old team, showed Kirk and, the Falcons why they were perfectly fine, moving on from him and not giving him that 4-year, $180 million deal, especially with their new quarterback, Sam Darnold, playing the way that he did, not only in Sunday's game, but the games leading up to it as well. But Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota ended in a 42-21 complete domination by his former team. The Vikings extend their winning streak now to 6 games, and they stay 1 game behind the Lions for the NFC North, while the Atlanta Falcons, on the other hand, continue to trend in the complete opposite direction with their 4th straight loss, and Sunday's loss means that they drop out of first place in the NFC South, which means now that the Buccaneers are in first place, and I believe they're the 4th seed right now because of the fact that they beat the Raiders, and now the Buccaneers obviously have a better record than the Falcons, which is pretty hard to believe considering at one point the Falcons were 6-3. They had already beaten the Buccaneers twice, and with the injuries that the Bucs were dealing with, you're thinking, or at least I thought, that the Falcons were going to cruise to a division title, but things really started to spiral out of control. And the main story before we get back to the Falcons is that Sam Darnold had a fantastic game. He achieved a career high in passing yards and passing touchdowns because of a 347-yard passing day and 5 touchdowns on top of that as well, both career highs, like I said. And on Kirk Cousins again, it is now, over the last 4 games, it is now 0 passing touchdowns for Kirk with 8 interceptions in that time. At the beginning of this losing streak, I thought, it's a rough game, it's fine. Then another one happened, I'm like, all right, that was bad, but they're still in a decent spot. They got to pick it up. Then the third one happened, I'm like, all right, who are they playing next? Because they got to win their next game. Oh, they're playing the Vikings? All right, this thing is really not looking good. And the Bucs, I'm not saying that they had the easiest schedule, but, they had favorable games coming up. So it really just turned on its head. And in large part on that, not only in this game, but overall, I think you could see the disparity in the defense, certainly, but the offense is really struggling with the way Kirk is playing right now. And I mean, you look at the weapons that we talked about in the preview that the Vikings had. Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson in this game became the first duo in Vikings history to each have 100+ receiving yards and 2+ receiving touchdowns in the same game. And this is the same franchise that had Randy Moss and Chris Carter, as a duo for their franchise. And these guys, just created history in terms of duos. That's a big deal. And not only them, but, TJ Hawkinson, he didn't have the greatest of games, but he still had a lot to say. Jalen Naylor's a nice receiver. Then you add Aaron Jones. And if Sam Darnold continues to play like this, man, he's going to have a lot more fans on his side, despite the fact, there is that lack of playoff experience, but it's hard to ignore what he's doing right now. But in terms of the game, I don't want to pin it all on Kirk and how, he's playing, but, the Falcons also had 12 penalties called on them for 127 yards, which is the most against any team in the NFL this year. And, overall, it was, you think of 12 flags, that's a lot, especially when the Vikings only had 6 on the day as well. And it's weird because in this game, the Falcons actually started winning. They were up 7-0. They got an early touchdown in there, but right after that, they failed a early 4th down. And then from that point where they missed that 4th down where they didn't convert, Minnesota scored 2 plays later, so it's still tied. It's not the worst thing. At worst, by going for it, you're back to square one. So it's 7-7 at this point. But then Minnesota really, took it to them leading into halftime because the Falcons tacked on a field goal, but the Vikings tacked on another touchdown. And after the Vikings missed a field goal, the Falcons missed a field goal. Both teams exchanged a touchdown right after that, and we were all tied up at 21-21 in, the midway point of the second half, or somewhere in the third quarter, right? After the third quarter, After the third quarter, it was still 21-21, despite the fact that it felt like the Vikings were, or should have been up a little bit more. Forget all of that. It was still 21-21. So, the Falcons still have a chance here, but then it all really broke loose in the fourth quarter for Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings in the fourth quarter scored 3 touchdowns to Atlanta's fumble, second interception of the game, and a turnover on downs. The fourth quarter belonged to the Minnesota Vikings and really made this game look a lot worse than it really started off as. Through 3 quarters, it was still 21-21, but the Vikings, really blew the roof off the place in that fourth quarter. 3 touchdowns, adding to that 5 touchdown day by Sam Darnold, and it ballooned the lead to 42-21. Obviously, the Falcons were held scoreless in the fourth quarter while everything turned to gold for the Minnesota Vikings. But overall, what I'll say about the Vikings, they're 11-2 for a reason, right? You don't just kind of stumble into it, right? Of course, the crazy numbers are great, and putting up big numbers like that is awesome. But I really like how we've seen this performance from Sam Darnold on top of the close wins that we saw previously against the Bears and against the I'm forgetting it. I'm gonna look it up real quick, but I forget who it was It was the Cardinals. The Cardinals and the Chicago Bears. Those two close wins for the Minnesota Vikings. I like that we saw those on top of this sort of performance, right? Because with Sam Darnold, the question was, can he make those big drives? Can he have those game-winning drives that you're going to need eventually against some of the best teams? And he showed it, whether it be, against the Cardinals, knowing what we know now about them, and the Chicago Bears, the worst team in the division. It's still something, right? In a game where they could have easily lost those games, right? Sam Darnold, stepped up and made the game-winning plays. But also, to show a performance like this, a complete domination by him, 5 touchdowns, over 340 passing yards, to know that you can have it, both ways and show both ends of the spectrum when it comes to quarterback performances and what you want to see out of your signal caller, that's what I really liked about it. Because, the close games are great. Knowing that you can win those are awesome, but also knowing that you're able to take full advantage of your weapons and blow a team out just in the fourth quarter based on a lot of the plays that you made as well. So I like seeing both aspects of it from Sam Darnold. But now we get to the Falcons and kind of closing this segment up by just saying it looks bad right now, obviously, because you lose 4 straight, but it's not all lost, right? It's not entirely just in the trash, like you can reverse it. The Falcons' next 3 opponents out of their last 4 games are the Giants, the Raiders, and the Panthers. So there is hope with that, to kind of catch up there, right? You can beat the Giants, you should beat all 3 of those teams, right? And looking at their 4th game, or their 4th opponent, you have the Washington Commanders in Washington, so I would probably side with the Commanders in that game. But the Giants, the Raiders, and the Panthers, you should be beating them if you want to get into the playoffs. And, we're talking about the Commanders, and they hold the last spot in the playoffs. So if the Falcons really want to prove that they belong in there, they have to go out there and beat a playoff caliber team. They just got to do it. Because at this point in time, I don't want to say that they're being exposed right now as, not a good team, but it's looking, pretty severe at this point in time with the Bucks, surging to the first place in the division, and the Falcons right now sitting in 9th place, right behind the Rams. So it's not like they have next dibs. They still got to get through 2 teams essentially to get into the playoffs. While the Buccaneers, we're talking about the Falcons' next games and how, relatively easy they are. The Buccaneers have to play the Chargers in Los Angeles. They got to play the Cowboys in Dallas. They host the Panthers, and then they host the Saints. So I would say the Falcons have it a little bit easier in that regard in terms of who you're playing and how it affects the other team. But it won't mean anything if Kirk's not playing better, and I think that's going to be the first step. So getting him to resemble what he did during that stretch where the Falcons got to first place in the division is the most important thing. And, you have 3 teams here that are going to be picking probably top 5 in the draft. So what better way to do it than in these next couple of games? If you don't, then you don't deserve to be in the playoffs. So that is what we took away from this game. Pretty remarkable, final result there by the Vikings. But, they continue to cruise along while the Falcons look for answers here quickly to try and save their playoff aspirations. But speaking of playoff aspirations, we're going to talk about the Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals. Why the Seahawks win means that the Arizona Cardinals are done, and also, are the Seahawks a lock to win the division, or should we still watch out for one team that is creeping up on everybody in the NFC? We're going to answer that question when we return after this break. Thank you guys for joining me here on this last segment on today's show. Just recapping one of the last games we have on here in the Seahawks and the Cardinals game that was a divisional game there in the NFC West, but the Seahawks officially swept the Cardinals with a 30-18 win in Arizona as well. On top of it all, the victory brings the Seahawks to an 8-5 record, still on top of the NFC West with the Arizona Cardinals, and really only, or I should say not the Cardinals, but really the Rams as the only team threatening them to kind of overtake them in the division. While also, this victory also was Seattle's 4th win in a row coming off of their bye week, which I think came at the opportune time, obviously, because before that, there was a lot of trouble with turnovers, and the games weren't really going in their way. They were dealing with injuries as well, but the bye week came at the perfect time for them, and now they've won 4 in a row, and it's their 7th win in a row over the Arizona Cardinals as well, certainly having their number over the last few seasons. And on that note, on the Cardinals' poor form, not only against the Seahawks, but overall, it's the Cardinals' 3rd loss in a row recently, and from a point where they were actually leading the NFC West, they were once, gonna have people contemplating whether or not the Cardinals were going to be the only team to make it out of that division, but they've sort of been exposed here, just showing everybody that they're not quite ready yet. I'm not going to say that they're bad or anything like that, because I do like some of the aspects of their team. I thought their defense has played a little bit better than what I originally thought it was going to be like. So, they got that. I like Jonathan Gannon as their coach. Marvin Harrison Jr. is obviously a monster. Trey McBride's fantastic. James Conner and Trey Benson and the running game they have going is pretty good as well. But, it's the parts of the teams that, separate the decent teams from the goods from the greats. The offensive line, the secondary, the defensive line as well. They need to get better in those areas, but they have some of the best players at their respective positions, so that is something that they have going for them, but it's not a way to sustain longevity, if that makes sense, right? Those are great for a couple games here or there, but to really drag it on for an entire season, you need the O-line, the D-line, the positions like that, a better secondary and things like that. So I think the Seahawks have kind of exposed the Cardinals in that way. And now the Cardinals are 6-7. They sit behind the Rams and the Falcons for a wild card spot. So they're probably going to have to win out. And the other teams are probably going to have to lose 2, I would have to say, of the remaining games for them to even have a chance. So they're pretty much eliminated. Not mathematically, but for me, I don't really see that happening. Then also in this game, while the Cardinals, lost by, 12 points in this game, there was no Kenneth Walker for the Seahawks in it, but it really didn't matter because Zach Charbonnet had a fantastic game to not only step up, because stepping up is getting like a touchdown, like 80 yards or something like that, and doing a decent job. But Zach Charbonnet, if you don't know who that is, he is their backup running back technically, and he ascended in this game to really help the Seahawks control the flow of the game with a career high 134 yards rushing on 22 carries, and he added 2 touchdowns as well. He also had 7 receptions for 59 yards. So a very great, almost 200 scrimmage yards from Zach Charbonnet. Like a great day overall for him, and he really was the star of the game for the Seahawks, doing it all for them in this game over the Cardinals. But this game started pretty well for the Cardinals, right? I feel like I've said that like 3 or 4 times in these games where one team starts off pretty well, but then quickly it just switches to the other team. And again, it just goes back to the parity, I guess, in the NFL that we've seen, right? Nothing is as it seems, apparently, in these games. But the Cardinals, in that same breath, they scored a touchdown to start this game to Michael Wilson, so they led this game 7-0, but Seattle responded with only a field goal, so the Cardinals were still in the lead. But it was 2 crucial mistakes by Kyler Murray that flipped this game on its head, like we've talked about with other, games on today's show, right? After the Seahawks hit that field goal, the Cardinals started to crumble. After that drive that the Seahawks scored a field goal, Seattle intercepted Kyler Murray. It was Ernest Jones who intercepted Kyler Murray over the middle of the field. A tight throw that I'm just assuming Kyler thought he was going to make, but Ernest Jones was sitting right there, and he plucked it out of the air. They were already in opposing territory, so that interception led to a touchdown, and now the Cardinals are losing 7-10. Bad moment, bad sequence of things, but it's only a 3-point game, right? Then Kyler Murray gets flushed out of the pocket. He tries to make a throw over a defender to, I believe it was Michael Wilson down the field, but the throw was very short, going to his left. It just was never going to reach Michael Wilson, and Kobe Bryant intercepted Kyler Murray on the following drive after he threw the first interception. Then the Seahawks scored. The Cardinals came back on the field, and Kyler threw another interception to Kobe Bryant. And, of course, from that point, then the Seahawks took that, and Charbonnet scored one of his touchdowns and put the team up 7-17. So, a nightmare sequence. 2 back-to-back interceptions for the Cardinals, and the Seahawks take advantage of it with 2 touchdowns. But still, it's only the first half, not the complete end of it, right? The Arizona Cardinals get a field goal, so they chip into that lead a little bit. But Zach Charbonnet really already put the nail in the coffin with a 51-yard touchdown, and now it's 10-24, and it's still only the first half, and it's 10-24. And that was pretty much it, because Seattle only added 2 more field goals after that to get to 30 points, and Arizona really couldn't do much outside of getting close into certain situations, but they only added 1 more touchdown and converted on a 2-point conversion, but it pretty much stayed where the score was. The final score was 30-18, but a pretty dominating performance by the Seahawks overall. And the main thing that jumps out at you, not just Zach Charbonnet, but the fact that Seattle's run game, you'd like to think, is starting to take better, a better approach to how they dominate games, or how much they're involved in these games, because Seattle really controlled the pace of Sunday's game a lot, and it was a performance like Zach Charbonnet's that really helped them do that. Because I'm not saying that the running game needs to have 120 yards each game, but having a consistency about it, right? 20 plus carries for maybe one guy, and then another guy gives you 15 or something like that. You have 2 good running backs with Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker, right, when he's healthy, to be able to do that. And I think all the good teams are doing it, right? You look at the Lions, obviously, the Packers to some extent with Eric Wilson going in there. The Steelers do it. The Bills have 3 guys that run the ball for them. The Ravens try to do it a little bit with Justice Hill being included in there. The Chiefs have Pacheco and now Kareem Hunt back. All the greatest teams try to do it now with a couple running backs. And I think the Seahawks have an opportunity to build on that now at the most important part of the year. And they control the time of possession. And when you do that, the other team, especially with the Cardinals throwing 2 interceptions, you feel like you have to get back into the game, right? You already messed up twice and it led to touchdowns. You feel like the possessions you do have now are so precious that you have to execute, right? You have to get back into the game. And in, contention to that, it makes you a lot more antsy. It makes you a lot more frantic because you feel like you have to get back into the game with all the limited possessions you might have. So yeah, the decision making is not quite there, and the pace of it all is all over the place, really. So that's what happens when you control the pace of the game, especially some more props to the Seahawks defense, because when you're running the ball like they did on Sunday, and then the defense is playing very well to get turnovers and also to get pressure on Kyler Murray, you get games like this, right, where you get a pretty dominant performance, and a lot of that credit should go to their young head coach, Mike McDonald, coming over from the Baltimore Ravens, and the great job that he did in their defense to come over, and I think now he's the youngest head coach in the NFL. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure he is now. To go through the ups and downs with this team, the hot start, the bad run of form, going into the bye week, and then to come out of it and be on the come up again, I think that's a credit to him, not only his defensive knowledge, obviously, with how their defense is playing now, but also his leadership and being able to control, the chaos a little bit. He deserves a lot of credit for it. And their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, coming over from Washington, and the kind of offense that he had over there in college with Michael Penix and how explosive they were. There was a little bit of hype and excitement coming from the Seahawks on what they were going to be with Ryan Grubb, and maybe you didn't take it seriously, but he's doing a great job, obviously, with how the Seahawks are able to put up points, now with the running game coming alive, and Jackson Smith-Njigba is showing the potential that he showed at Ohio State. Maybe the first year wasn't great for him, but now he's becoming the go-to guy, it seems like, for Geno Smith, because he has the route running, he has the speed, he can do it all basically as a receiver. Not that DK can't, but I feel like you can move JSN all over the place, where maybe DK is just limited to the outsides. But I think Ryan Grubb's done a great job with him, and just overall, it makes it more exciting looking forward to this matchup with the Rams, because to me the Rams are the only team that's really gonna push them at this point. The 49ers still have a losing record, so I don't really think it's gonna be them. The Cardinals are already out of it, so to me it's really gonna just come down to the Rams, and the Rams just had a massive win over the Buffalo Bills, so they're feeling good, and they don't play each other until the last game of the season. So if they continue to do their own thing, it could come down literally to the last game of the season to determine who's a top 4 seed in the playoffs, which is going to be super exciting, obviously. But, I am kind of leaning towards the Rams a little bit, just because if it does get to that game, I like the Rams a little bit better, just because, they've already beaten them. But along the way, the Rams still have to play Seattle, right? But the Seahawks still have to play Minnesota and Green Bay, while the Rams really only have to play the 49ers. I mean, they have to play the Jets, the Cardinals, before they play the Seahawks. So those two opponents are a lot easier than the Packers and the Vikings. So if the Seahawks can win both of those games and get to that final game where it's all on the line, it's going to be a fantastic game, and I'll feel even better about the Seahawks if they beat the Vikings and the Packers. But I am still leaning towards the Rams a little bit, just because of the schedule. If the Seahawks can prove me wrong, then maybe that last game falls in their favor. But overall, it was a great game and a great run of form by the Seahawks over the last couple games. But with that in mind, we will finish up today's show with that topic. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode, and please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast on YouTube and really everywhere on all forms of social media. Go over to the YouTube channel, the Podcast Network channel, and the Sports Network channel to catch more coverage around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. On there, you're going to see a lot more content around the NFL, but also if you guys join me each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be on here doing these live shows as well. So with that, I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, 6:30, to talk some more about the NFL.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that